Welcome to the webinar, everybody. 3 mistakes that can ruin your email lists with Mailgun. My name is Gwen Clair. I am a senior account executive here. A lot of people call me Boss B. I'm kind of a big deal. You know, it's like,
if you say so.
I mean, everybody says it.
I think
just
that's like
basically, it's mostly just me, honestly. But
I think that's self-reported.
it's, I don't know. Some people say it, I think.
And I'm Nick. I'm a technical account manager here, but I focus on deliverability. It's what I'm passionate about, and I help customers get their messages to the inbox, and I love seeing results. So that's really kind of what I focus on.
Passion and deliverability. You don't often hear them together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's your
wife,
man.
It's why, like, hey,
Survivor's wife.
I'm passionate about other things too.
Sure. So thanks, guys, for joining. We appreciate you guys coming alongside us. Sorry for the technical issues. We're figuring this out slowly. So to give you a little bit of an overview, what you can expect, first thing we're going to start with, why does this matter? Why are we even having this webinar?
Exactly. It's a good question. I mean, we all talk about, mistakes that marketers make and, why you should know about them. I mean, really what it comes down to is, deliverability, right? Everyone's heard that term. If your messages aren't getting to the inbox, your deliverability is not doing well. Deliverability is a little different than delivery. Deliverability is, just that messages getting to the inbox versus just accepted by the Smtp gateway. Yeah, that's kind of some of the things that we're going to cover today. If you have poor deliverability, you're going to have things that are affected. You're going to have upset customers. You're going to have upset bosses. Bosses are going to be yelling at you like, why is our performance not doing well? Things of that nature that people don't really think about.
Yeah.
You're going to have additional support costs because your customers are going to be reaching out to your support teams asking why they're not receiving messages. That's never a fun conversation for support.
Another thing core deliverability leads to, and something that I can speak to, is I'm the money person.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with all the people that want to come in and use Mailgun, so I'm sure you have people that have come in saying, "Oh, we're getting no ROI," or our ROI is a dropping pin.
Yeah,
Mailgun out.
Exactly. They're sending 5 million emails, and they're only getting 5% from the inbox, and they're paying thousands of dollars for these emails, and they're not actually getting anything out of them. So ensuring that the emails actually get to the inbox are a huge, huge thing. I think also, and you can probably talk about this better, is the difference between deliverability and just delivery. Because I know a lot of clients come to me and say, hey, on our platform it says, or on our Mailgun UX, it says that we are getting 99% deliverability. We don't need help. We're doing great.
That it was delivered, it was handed off by Mailgun to the recipient provider or ISP like Gmail or Yahoo, for example. That doesn't tell you anything about where that message went. It could have been filtered to spam. It could have been filtered, to another folder if the customer has filters set up. It knows nothing about that. Delivery rate knows nothing about where the message went, just that it was accepted.
Yeah, so deliverability is literally getting the emails into the inbox. Yeah. Cool. So now that you guys have an idea of why this is important, let's jump into the 3 mistakes.
Yeah, so the first one I kind of want to touch on is something that I think is a huge problem, and that's unprotected sign-up forms. They're all over, and if you've kept up with news or seen posts or maybe your IP's been blacklisted, you probably have come across the term mail bombing. It's basically where
sounds scary.
It's really scary and it's crazy. So basically, what happens? Bots crawl the internet looking for unprotected sign-up forms, and basically once they've identified that, they will bring together a lot of different forms and basically bombard them with a recipient's email address. And, the end thing that happens is, thousands and thousands of, even maybe tens of thousands of messages start to go to that recipient's email address that was maliciously signed up. And that obviously, can impact you. It can cause blacklistings. Like I mentioned, Spamhaus is a company that actually blacklists a lot because of mail bombing.
Oh,
so
really?
It's something to be cautious of. I actually did a blog post kind of around this yesterday, and CAPTCHA is the best way to protect it. But if you want to go a step further, you can set up honeypot fields on your forms. Humans aren't going to see that, but the bots that are crawling the web forms are going to see these little extra fields, and if a value gets put into that field, it's a good indication that this is a malicious attempt.
So do you mean like CAPTCHA, like those stupid little boxes that I have to fill in every single time?
Yes,
like
yes.
pick all the cards.
That is the best way to protect your
boxes.
That's the best way to protect your forms.
Oh my gosh, they did that. is the worst, but apparently it's useful. I didn't realize. I mean, I know there's a reason behind it, but every time stupid cars.
Hey, I get annoyed by them too all the time. I don't want to have to
Worse.
find cars or signs. I've seen some really intricate ones that even make those, ones where picking out cars, that's easy.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a reason for it. People often don't, think that can cause an issue with, their performance as a sender. But if bad email addresses are getting into your list and you aren't doing anything like, confirmed opt-in, those addresses are going to live in your list for extended periods of times, which, it kind of leads on to the next mistake. The first one being the unprotected forms, but everything kind of goes together into deliverability. If those addresses continue to persist in your list for periods of time, your deliverability is just going to continue to go down and down. So the second mistake we've outlined is
List hygiene.
List hygiene. Yeah.
So not only collecting the emails correctly and making sure that the list makeup is the best it can be, but also having some practices to make sure it's maintained. So I know one of them, and I love the name of it, sunset policy. Just kind of sounds cool. So one of the best ways to get the best deliverability is to put that sunset policy in, which from my understanding is having some sort of time period, whatever your company is comfortable with, let's say 30, 60, 90 days. Yeah. You are interacting with one of your clients via email, waiting to see if they respond, if they engage at all. And if they don't, say bye-bye, sunset. Yeah. You try them out. If they don't respond, then they're out.
Yeah, as a TAM, I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of good practices. I've seen a lot of bad practices, and it's besides the list acquisition side, where forms play a role, list hygiene is one of the first things I tackle. Getting that sunset policy in place is hugely important to the list health overall. I can't tell you how many times I've seen customers sending to recipient email addresses for years upon years, and those users probably have dead mailboxes. They've moved on to a different company, or those addresses were even recycled altogether and turned into spam traps, which is something that you definitely do not want on your list because you will be blacklisted. So yeah, list hygiene, something really important. Sunset policies is like the key there. Just getting rid of those unengaged users, inactive users after a period of time.
Yeah.
I actually have a really good example. One of my customers a while back came to me. They were doing about 3.5 to 4 million messages a month. Yeah. That's a good amount of volume. But they came to us, they want it managed, and they wanted to see improvements. They weren't getting good open rates. They were getting like 15% open rate, across the board. Particularly Gmail was a problem. So the way we tackled this was, first, tackling the acquisition side, making sure, users were opting in and confirming their email addresses.
Yeah.
But the biggest change was the list hygiene. I had them clean out their list of people that just weren't engaging. Once we did all this pruning and cleaning of their list, a few months later, it's not going to be an overnight thing. You got to work at it. You got to, continually do this for a month or 2 months. But for this customer, after a few months, we came back and checked things. They were doing like 1.5 million a month at that point, but they were getting, close to 50% opens. I think it was somewhere in the 40 to 45% range. So they jumped, threefold just by removing unengaged users. Yeah. And, with that smaller list, they even got more opens than with a bigger list, which is really kind of, a funny thing to think about. That's because of the engagement. More clicks, more openers, your reputation rises and you get more messages to the inbox.
And you're saving money. I mean, like they cut their email in half. Yeah. I mean, of course, Mailgun wants you guys to send as much email as possible, but at the end of the day, I mean, we want you to send to the best list.
Well, the thing about it is that whenever you're getting better reputation, you can actually go back to those unengaged users and actually bring them back to life. Some of them, those users probably would have never seen your messages, but run a re-engagement campaign. You might get something from them.
Yeah, and
so
I know
you add those to your list as well.
And I know people like list number is every client I talk to is like, well, we have a list of 10 million people, and they're like so proud of it. And then I'm like, well, have you segue into the third mistake, our email validation list? They come to me and they say, we have a list of 10 million. It's a huge list. It's the best list. And then I'm like, well, have you run it through email validation? What kind of list hygiene are you guys using? And they're like, oh, no, we haven't. And I'm like, well, maybe you should. Like, that's going to be a huge, huge part of getting good deliverability, good reputation. And they're like, well, my manager needs to make sure we don't make this list any smaller. Yeah. Like, I can't have 5 million instead of 10 million. Yeah. But it's like, why? You know, like, why send to users if they're just going to be bounced or they're not going to engage or you're just wasting money, right?
It honestly doesn't make sense.
I mean,
I get it. I get, you know, you want to have a big, sexy list. Like, oh, I have a list of, you know, 100 million users.
Yeah, I'm
but,
so rich.
You know, a lot of that list is probably made up of, you know, bad addresses one way or the other, whether they're spam traps or, you know, recycled addresses. Or like I said earlier, just invalid now, like employee moved on from their company. They no longer use that email address. Yeah. But these customers will continue to send to those, you know, old lists.
Yeah. And just pay us for useless emails.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the cool things the email validation API actually does. Yep. So it does quite a few checks. The ones I'll touch on is typos and syntax errors. So as far as typos go, you know, you log in and you put gwen@gmail.co or gwen@yahoo.co or something like that.
Yahoo.com. Yes. I've seen them all.
There's so many.
I've seen .co, obviously. .con is probably the biggest one, to be honest.
Those are pretty close. M&N are super close.
M&N, yes, they are very close.
Fat finger, I do that stuff all the time.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see funny ones too. Like I've seen some really, hitmail.com, like that sounds like a dangerous service right there.
Yikes. That's not what you want to type in.
But typos happen. I mean, people make mistakes, people rush through forms, and sometimes maybe people do it on purpose. So you got to account for those as well.
Exactly. So typos that you run through list, or you actually can embed it in your web form too. We'll actually touch on how to use it, but to get it proactively rather than reactively. And the other thing would be syntax. So making sure that the makeup of the email is actually correct. So we do those little checks, which is really cool. That's actually how it started, right? The email validation started with the...
Yeah, so our email validation API, just a little history lesson for y'all, is started back in...
Professor Nicholas.
I'm the boring one. She's the happy, exciting one. But
it's fine here, folks.
Yeah, so I mean, our email validation got started back in 2013. It was used by quite a few of our customers. Last year, we decided to make that product better. And because of that, you know, we came out with some new features, and we'll kind of touch on those, but you know, we wanted to make the product as best as it can, and give users the best.
We want to make it as best as it can. Is that what we wanted to do?
We wanted to make it as best.
We want to make it as best as it can.
Yes, whatever.
We wanted to improve it and make it awesome. So we added some really cool things. So previously we would just do like some syntax checks and things like that. Then we actually started pinging the recipient server.
Yeah, that was the big change, the Smtp callback verification. You know, that means we're actually opening up a connection to the recipient server and checking, is this address valid? You know, that's a big win for you as a sender to know that before you actually have to send a message, because bounce rates affect deliverability.
Absolutely.
To be able to get that before you even have to send to them is a win-win.
Proactive. I mean, literally, why like react? I have clients come to me all the time who are like, well, we have huge problems now because we didn't go with managed or we didn't use the email validation tool.
Yeah, it is so much easier. It's so much easier, y'all, to take care of issues proactively, stop them before they happen. Repairing damaged reputation is very difficult and not easy. It takes time.
It does.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much harder to fix things than to just, you know, follow best practices and be on the right direction to start. Yeah,
it is. I mean, it's a slower process when you're fixing things rather than just starting from the get-go. So would recommend utilizing it from the front.
Yeah. You know, on top of the Smtp callback verification, we introduced a couple new features as well. One of those was role-based addresses. We're now checking for role-based addresses.
What's a role-based address? Nicholas, Professor Nicholas.
That's a good question. What is a role-based address? A role-based address is, you know, instead of a single person, it's a role at a company. So think like support or sales. It's multiple people. So, you know, maybe one person signed up, you know, sales at something for some kind of marketing message. You know, that's fine for that one person, but then 10 other people on that same list get those messages. They're going to complain. Like, it's just a higher chance of complaints.
Yeah, you're taking on a list of potentially 10 or 15 people that don't actually want those emails, and you're now taking a huge risk that those people are going to say, why am I receiving this? I'm going to click this as spam. Nobody understands how important that spam button is. Like, they have so much power. I remember explaining to my parents that like the spam button has a lot of power.
It actually impacts senders, yes.
Yeah, my mom was like, I just click spam whenever I'm sick of an email. And I was like, Catherine, you can't do that.
Unsubscribe.
Yes, unsubscribe, folks. But, so, sorry.
Our validation API also checks one more type, of address. That's a disposable email address. Gwen and I were talking earlier about this. She uses them. I'm not going to lie. But honestly, it's not something you want in your list. If you aren't familiar with disposable email addresses, basically there's free services out there that offer you a free temporary email address that you can use to sign up, get a little coupon to go shopping on whatever site you choose. But people use them. Problem with that though is you don't want them in your list as a sender because those users aren't going to engage after that initial email.
You're just wasting money.
Yeah, I mean you could use double opt-in, confirmed opt-in, and maybe cut that off after the first initial message. But we kind of believe that you just shouldn't have them in your list at all.
It's just taking a risk, I mean, of course, it depends on how risk averse you are, but it's just kind of a waste at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have the hugest list in the world full of disposable email boxes, and what are they worth? Nothing.
Yeah. They're going to do no good for you.
No, they are.
And the email validation product is something like we see a lot of bright things in the future with. So we're constantly going to be making updates to make it even better, best.
Yes.
Make it best. What did I say earlier? Make it even best. Yeah.
No, there's going to be some really cool improvements coming down the line. I recommend keeping your eyes peeled. But then as far as just using it, so there's typically two ways. I typically recommend to clients using it in the web form. So it's a proactive approach. So as you're collecting emails, like yourself as a marketer, you are spending, I'm sure you have an idea of like how much each lead or each person that signs up costs the company. Mm-hmm. So if you, let's say it's $10 or $100 or $1,000, if you're bringing these people to your website and they're putting in their email and they're not putting in the correct email, you literally just burn that money. Like instead use our email validation tool, like in the back of the web form and just all that money you were burning before to send to me, Yeah.
Yeah, the integrating with the web form is actually what the email validation API was originally created for back in the day.
Yeah.
It's really cool. You add it to your existing forms. Depending on the programming language, you can integrate it pretty seamlessly. We have documentation on that.
So much documentation.
Love
documentation right here.
But it's kind of cool. Like you can add. So I'm sure you've all seen it on like websites where you put in an address. Maybe you typed it wrong, the first time on accident, but incorporate the email validation API into your form, and we'll like basically put up a little tooltip that says, "Hey, you entered this address in wrong, or did you mean this?" So that's something that is really helpful.
Yeah.
Again, that's at the point of acquisition. You want to make sure you capture that email address correctly.
Absolutely.
And the second way, a lot of customers need this, and I understand it. You have an existing user list or email list that you want to clean up.
Huge list.
Yeah. So you can use our email validation API for bulk cleaning as well. So if you have, an old list that you, hopefully have somewhat kept up with, but if you just need to check it again, you can make bulk requests to our email validation API, and we'll go back and, return responses on whatever is related to that particular email address, whether it's a disposable address, whether it's a role base, or if it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I actually recommend clients run their lists as often as possible. I mean, ideally like once a month, but if not every few months, just to make sure, people stop using emails,
Right.
People leave companies, like for so many reasons, emails just start going invalid. So running that through is really a best practice. So something to keep in mind.
That goes into the whole list hygiene thing, the number 2 mistake that we talked about.
Yeah,
just keeping up with your list. You can run the validation periodically.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the usage of the API. There's actually a couple other tips that, again, I've used the service. I've helped customers integrate. So I've seen a lot of, use cases, some people using it incorrectly. So, a couple tips that I always kind of make sure I touch on whenever a customer is integrating is making sure that if they want SMTP callback verification enabled, you need to pass a true statement for that parameter. By default, we aren't going to do that SMTP check, but just pass that as true, and we'll go ahead and check it.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure that that's out there, because I've seen that question come up saying that, we're not seeing that particular expected response. We'll still do all the other checks, like the checks for the types of addresses. We'll do the syntax checks, checking if it's a typo, but we aren't going to open a connection to the recipient server.
Yeah, so pass that as true.
Yeah. And another thing I always like to mention is, there's different responses in the API responses that you get. We'll have fields that say is valid. That may, it sounds like the address is valid, right? I mean, I can agree.
It sounds like to me, right?
That just means it's syntactically correct. You want to check each of the responses. You're going to have, is disposable email address, is role-based address, is typo. You're going to have different fields. So if one of those things is true, we'll say it there, even if it says is valid. But if we're doing the SMTP check, there will be another field for
fields.
Is valid. Well, that's the whole thing with the email validation API. We aren't making any decisions for you. We're just giving you information about the addresses.
We're empowering you.
Yeah. So your application can then, do whatever the rules that you set forth.
Exactly.
If you want to allow typos for whatever reason, I don't know why you would do that, but if you do, you can.
Yeah. Doesn't make any sense.
And the whole role-based email
Sure.
addresses, I didn't touch on this earlier, but some businesses, it makes sense for role-based addresses. So that's something to account for. Marketing, though, generally shouldn't ever be sending to role-based addresses.
Yeah, makes sense. Well,
Is that it?
I think we're at the end, but we have time for questions. We
want to hear from you guys. So
yeah, I know Elena has been collecting some questions over here, so she's going to put them up on the screen so we can answer them. Drum roll. Uh-oh. We drink a lot of Topo Chico here.
It's really
We
good.
love our Topo Chico. And Cheez-Its. It's kind of a weird thing.
All right. So
All right, sorry.
Chris
Anyway.
wants to know, we only send out 3 emails per user that request a demo account. Should we be as concerned about the same things a big company that sends out millions of emails per month? You want to take it? No, I got this one. So, that's a good question. I personally believe that, whether you're small, big, however many messages you're sending, I think you should think about email in the same way.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're capturing, the most the complete valid address possible. ISPs are checking all things, metrics, engagement rates, open rates, click rates, complaint rates. So you want to make sure the messages you're sending are getting engaged with by users. So,
And just because you're small now doesn't mean that you won't grow. So,
exactly. And you want to, build a healthy, long, list. So,
exactly.
Start from the beginning.
Exactly. Chris asked, when you say email bombing, are these different email addresses or the same ones? That's a neat question, that's for sure.
You sure you don't want to talk about email bombing?
I love talking about email bombing, but I'll let you talk about it this time.
I actually like talking about email bombing. It's
I'm sure you do.
It's horrible to the recipient, and I hate it. But it's so interesting the links that spammers go to. So yeah, email bombing. It's one address. So say someone wants to maliciously attack, Joe@gmail.com.
Poor Joe.
Yeah, poor Joe, right? They'll basically take that email address and sign it up for, I don't know, tens of thousands of web forms online that are unprotected.
Oh.
If you think about it, usually you get a confirmation message once you sign up for a website, right? So that means nothing but confirmation messages start going to that mailbox. And we're talking tens of thousands of messages. It makes the mailbox useless or unusable. Like you can't even load it up. I've heard horror stories. This is why Spam House has taken such a strong stance on it. They want to clean this up.
Yeah.
And the email community is kind of working together to fight this problem. But at the end of the day, the end users, you need to protect your websites. Put in CAPTCHA, implement a confirmed opt-in process, do whatever you can as a sender.
Yeah.
Sir Knight. A knight.
Sir Knight. We have a knight in our presence? Whoa, crazy. So Sir Knight asked, why are Microsoft services much more strict to real users? Does it make a huge difference to have dedicated IP for less than 10,000 email sending?
That's a good question and a hard one to answer directly.
Yeah.
What I will say is, I have, seen firsthand that, if as a sender you incorporate best practices, some that we've talked about here today and others, that you can have a good experience anywhere. I have customers that have, great results with Microsoft. They get into the inbox constantly. So, it's hard to say, dedicated IP is something like I always recommend just if you want to, make sure you're responsible for your reputation, make sure you're not affected by other senders.
But it's not a silver bullet. Clients will reach out to me a lot and think like, this is going to be the thing that's going to change everything for me. It's not a silver bullet. We've seen it work multiple ways. It's been a huge improvement. It's also sometimes not been the best idea.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it depends on how risk averse you are, right? If you don't you don't even want to consider having anybody else touch your email, get a dedicated IP. It's worth it.
Yep.
All right. Chris says, is this Chris, you're asking a lot of questions. This guy's listening. I love it.
Is this the same Chris?
I know, it's the same Chris. Chris, you were on it, man. Chris says, how do you know when the user opens email? Does that assume they click allow images?
That's a good question as well. By default, some services will show images. Some do require you to, click to allow images. But yeah, basically we know a user opens. If you're using Mailgun tracking, we'll basically embed an invisible pixel. The user doesn't see it, but once that image pixel gets triggered, we then get that data back and track it as an open. So it's a good point. Does that assume that they click allow messages? Yeah, if they have that restriction in place on the mailbox where they have to do that, then yeah, you can assume that they click that link. Nice.
Renee wants to know, do you have a recommended time frame for reviewing email addresses for sunset strategies? Yeah, is there what's the...
So it depends on a lot of things. I generally start, 3 months is what I generally start with, but there's a lot of things that come into play. Like if you're only sending a message once a month, 3 months is a bit aggressive, right?
Yeah.
So you would want to go, extend that out 6 months, maybe a year, maybe more. It's really just dependent on your use case. If you're sending daily emails, you might want a more strict sunset policy, maybe 30 days as opposed to 3 months.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of dependent on your particular use case.
Cool. Get the next one. So does Smtp callback verification come with any additional cost? It doesn't.
It does not.
Why are you looking at me like that? It doesn't. No. So if you're paying for the email validation tool, you're getting all of those cool checks.
Yeah, no, you don't have to pay for it. It's just something that you have to, like I mentioned previously, you have to explicitly enable that.
Yeah. So when you're paying for the email validations, everything's included. Don't worry.
Yeah. What's the next question?
Chris wants to know, Chris, this guy's on it, man. Will it send out, wait, you already said that one. We already did that one. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Never mind.
We just read the same question.
How do you know you're sending, so how do you know you're sending emails to your list too frequently?
It's all about engagement. If you're, keeping an eye on your data, which I hope you are, you always should understand the behaviors of your users. If you're sending, messages, 3 times a week, and things are going well, and then you're continually doing that, and after a period of time, maybe you're starting to see a reduction in open rate. Maybe they're getting too many messages. Again, it all goes back to the messages you're sending and your particular use case, but just tracking those open rates. If you start to see a dip in open rates, but you're still, hitting the inbox, you can find that out by doing, seed tests or other things, but just tracking that. If you start to see things change, you can even run A/B tests, take one group here, do 3 messages a month or 3 messages a week, take another group, run a different test, 5 days a week, and see what your user's behavior is. Something I always recommend as well is getting the preferences of your users. So if you,
smart.
Yeah, I mean, if you,
I love when they ask me how often I want to get emails.
I know you might not want to see all those questions once you sign up for a service, but it's helpful to the sender. They'll do what you want. So if you, as a sender, start asking your users how often they want to receive messages, you're going to make them happier. You want a happy recipient in your email list.
I actually have sometimes when I try and unsubscribe, they're like, do you want me to, instead of doing 6 times a week, do you want 2 times? And I'm like, yes, please only send me the ones where I'm saving the most money. I only want.
In that case, she was still a valuable user.
Yeah.
But if they didn't ask that question, she would have been.
I would have been like, see you guys. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
What do we got?
Could I use the Mailgun validation service to manage my lists, even if I'm sending with someone else? Absolutely. You definitely can. You can come and use it as you please. We, of course, recommend utilizing both the email service and the email validation tool, more just because it's this more streamlined approach, more efficient.
Yep. It's easier for you.
Yeah. You have one bill instead of 2.
One-stop shop, right? Yeah. You don't have to be logging into all these different services.
No. So it's nice that everything can just be streamlined and it's much easier.
Yeah.
And we're the best, you said.
And we're the best.
Would
we be able to sync lists between Mailgun and Mailchimp, for example? Yeah. So our API, depending on what your use case is, you can, pull information. If we're talking about, validation API, if what our API responds with, you can take that response and probably, I don't know about Mailchimp's APIs, but there's probably a link between the two. Like if you have information from Mailchimp, you can post that to Mailgun's API and basically share data between the two.
Cool. Do you have a method to control email validation abuse? One person on one form entering a lot of email addresses, trying to break the API to get approval of a bad email address. Yes.
Yes, we do. I'm trying to read the question again.
Yeah, okay, I was like, she's writing them up there and we're trying to do it.
Yeah, so we have rate limiting that you can put in place on the validations. Just through your Mailgun control panel, you can log in and set hourly limits or daily limits, whatever makes sense for you. That will help to prevent abuse. That brings up a good point. There's a public API key and a private API key. For forms, you want to use the public API key. That's where you can put the limits in place to prevent things like this.
Oh, cool. Is there anything else? How can I add the validation service to my existing forms?
I kind of touched on this earlier, but that's a good question. Every developer has their choice of programming language, right?
Yeah.
That's where our documentation comes into play. Whether you're using Python, PHP, Ruby, I don't know what all the languages are. But we give documentation so that you can figure out how to implement it into your existing code base. As
an email service built for developers, we understand that not all you guys don't really want to talk to us all the time. So we've made our documentation extremely in depth, super
Maybe
in
you're
depth.
Looking for a different word.
I was looking for a different word, but similar idea.
Maybe it'll come to you.
Yeah. But we've made it very, very easy to run through. If you ever have any questions, of course, we have our support team, the best. But our documentation is extremely extensive. That's the word I was looking for.
Extensive.
So you guys can, pick and choose based on your use case, how exactly you want to implement it. Would recommend checking out our documentation for that.
All right, we got another question. Could it pose problems to have one dedicated IP for all of our 9 domain names? Seems like this could be a problem. Well, I mean, it could. If one domain is doing something it shouldn't be doing, then it can affect all those other 8 domains, right? Obviously, we would love to see all those 9 domains, following best practices and doing, what they need to do to have a good reputation. So again, it just depends. If you have 8 good senders but 1 questionable, maybe I would probably break those up.
Yeah.
So you don't have any risk of bleed over.
Or different types of emails, things like that. Separating those amongst different IPs, different domains is really, really smart. You don't want that to muddle.
Yeah, ISPs have got much better at identifying different traffic, different senders from the same IP. But in this case, it's
not worth it.
Don't take the risk.
Definitely not worth it. Also, thank you, Ben. Robust. That's also a word I could have been looking for.
Robust. That is a good one.
It's in my brain.
Much more robust.
Much more robust. Is there anything else? Jordan wants to know the best criteria for list sanitization. Sanitation. Sorry.
Best criteria for list sanitation. So sorry if I'm wrong in how I'm interpreting this question, but my interpretation is you just want to know what of our responses would be the best thing to follow. I would recommend getting rid of everything that we return back. So if it's a typo, I would recommend clearing those out completely. If it's a role-based address, again, depending on your company, maybe you're a service that provides alerts where messages need to go to info ad or ops ad or something like that, then you can ignore that. Disposable email address, I don't think they belong in marketing mailing list.
Wasting money, folks.
Yeah, wasting money again. Syntax, obviously, if syntax is failing, we're not going to allow you to send to it anyways. SMTP callback verification. Yeah, if we're saying if we're saying the address doesn't exist, you should definitely sanitize that from your list.
Get rid of it. Why are you wasting money?
I think
Just take that money and throw it. Send it to me.
I think I hit on all the responses. Apologies if I didn't, and I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it was a little bit. Anything else? If I want to send an email campaign of 50,000 emails, how many should I send maximum per day? That's a loaded question.
Sorry, I'm rereading through the question.
If I want to send an email campaign of 50,000 emails a day, of 50,000 emails, how many should I send?
Well, that comes down to your reputation as a sender and how you've warmed up. If you're going to do that 50K, you can easily do that in a day if
No
you've warmed up to that.
Yeah.
You can do a lot more in a day if you've warmed up to that and you have a solid reputation as a sender. Again, getting a solid reputation means following the best practices.
Yeah, and like being consistent is huge. So being like sending spiky emails, like if you're typically sending like 500 emails and then one day you send 50,000, you're probably not going to get the best deliverability, and you're probably going to like possibly ruin your reputation like a little bit. So if that's the scenario, then obviously work with that.
Yeah, consistency is definitely important.
Yeah, consistency is huge. Spike, I mean, think of what a spammer does, right? They buy a list and they send it out to 1 million people for as long as they can, and then they get rid of it. That's what you know the inbox providers look for.
Yep.
Can we suggest another way to protect forms instead of CAPTCHA? Is there a way for me not to have to fill out those stupid boxes?
Yes, absolutely.
There is?
It's what we're.
Oh, wait.
There's more. We're talking about the whole honeypot field thing that I mentioned on. I put out a blog post yesterday. You can put in these honeypot fields in your form. Basically, they're invisible to the end user. Your end users won't see them at all. But the bots that are crawling all the different sites looking for unprotected forms will fill in that field.
Bots.
So basically, put some logic into your code that says, if this field is filled out, then reject the request. If it's not, then it's a human. That's another way outside of using CAPTCHA.
Robots are taking over the world, folks. Well, I think
that's all the questions.
Woo woo! Yes. If there is anything else, actually, they're typing it now. There's still a few questions, but email webinar@mailgun.com and we will get those over to you and answered. We appreciate the time. Thanks for
all the good questions.
Yeah, awesome questions. Thanks for working with us on the technical difficulties. We're doing our best over here.
Yeah, sorry about the start. But I hope you learned something here today, and just let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.